Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. And now, thank you, Gopal sir, for showing us the path and guiding us through CIC's inspiring vision. And now, before we begin the first session, it's my duty to introduce you to our chief guest, P. Sainath sir. He's a Magsaysay prize-winning journalist, renowned in his work on social and economic inequality, deprivation, and rural poverty in India. Described by Amartya Sen as one of the world's great experts on famine and hunger. He has received over 60 awards, including the Fukuoka Grand Prize, while declining others like Padma Bhushan due to his belief in journalistic independence. His books include the bestseller Everybody Loves a Good Drought and The Last Hero, Foot Soldiers of Indian Freedom, which integrates stories with the People's Archive of Rural India, PARI, a unique multimedia platform he founded in 2014. With that, I would like to invite Sainath sir to kick off the Literature Festival. Let's give him a big round of applause, guys. Thank you.
But your mention of the Moroccan bookseller reminded me of the kind of extraordinary people we have in this country associated with books. My favorite, and I did a story on him in 2014, is a tribal called Chinnathambi from the Mudavan tribe, on the Kerala or Idukki, in Idukki, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. These are people who went from Tamil Nadu centuries ago into Kerala. That is the only panchayat in Kerala which is a fully tribal panchayat. There is no other Adivasi ruled panchayat in Kerala. Has the lowest literacy by Kerala standards, lowest. So this guy Chinnathambi, at age 70, he is now he's 83 now, I guess, comes and sets up a chai shop. This is in the midst of the elephant migration trails. Yeah, 23 kilometers from the nearest town, which is Munnar. And he sets up a chai shop and a library consisting of 132 books, including, and keeps a register. And you get free chai if you come and borrow a book. There is a one-time fee for joining, and after that, he makes it clear that you'll get black chai. He can't afford milk, so it's black chai. And Chinnathambi gives out chai every day. I told him, how do you know this is working? And do people? I looked at the books. They included the Malayalam translation of Silapadikaram. I said, come on, Chinnathambi. I mean, I don't believe that, what sort of books are you keeping here? He had books from Gandhi to Marx, that literature, and a number of other, all classics, the only classics of literature that he had there. And he kept a register. So I told him, listen, are people really reading these books? He opened his register and showed me that in 2 years, Silapadikaram had been borrowed 32 times. Okay? So you do have extraordinary people. But about books and why books, I suppose most of you know that Oxford's declaration of word of the year, brain rot. Brain rot is the dictionary, is the Oxford word of the year. Now, this brain rot refers to the deterioration of a person's mental intellectual state, especially from overconsumption of material, particularly of online content, of online content considered trivial or unchallenging or vegetabilizing. This net people have a different word for it. It's called doom scrolling. You scroll at the risk of your own doom. It's the act of spending too much time reading or scrolling through negative or upsetting content on internet, especially in social media and news outlets. Study after study is coming out, including in the last 2 years from Harvard Medical School, University of Oxford, King's College, Oxford, on how harmful these trends are to mental health. So it's not just what you are reading, it's where you are reading it and how you are reading it. The technology of reading that you adopt. Yeah. Just one little example which the Guardian gave recently. Probably the most highly viewed short animated video is a 11-second video called Skibbity Toilet, which consists of a human head, animated human head, protruding from a toilet, reciting the lyrics Skibbity dop dop dop, yes, yes. Viewed, last number viewed 215 million times. Yeah. And the Harvard Medical School, the University of Oxford, King's College, all of them, there are innumerable studies. All of them are showing that the evidence of net content of this kind and people's fixation with it and with WhatsApp University and stuff is shrinking our gray matter, uh, shortening attention span, and weakening memory. And there's a point beyond which it affects cognition. I'm very sure of that from interacting with people who do that. Yeah. So, yeah. But so that I think the importance of books and lit fests and these kind of efforts that you're putting in, is validated automatically by what's going on around us on the net, particularly. Give me a book any day. But today, in the 20 or 25 minutes that I have, I was actually asked to speak on something else rather than my book, Last Heroes. So I will not speak on the book Last Heroes, though I think you might find it outside. I'm going to speak on something that, by the way, will affect reading habits and everything even more, which is the growing and unbelievable levels of inequality that have developed in this country in the last 25, 30 years. You have to really, it's very difficult to imagine the kind of inequalities that have come. But I'll maybe begin by telling you that Thomas Piketty, in the World Inequality Lab report, in the latest of the World Inequality Lab reports, they make two observations. Inequality in India is now equaling the levels seen in the heyday of the British Raj. They're putting around 1921, when a Britain that has emerged victorious from World War I has come in there. But he says, they just use the words equals the inequality level seen at the heyday of the British Raj. And well, that's one part of it. The second is, incidentally, the report also notes that most of the billionaire wealth, and I'm about to tell you how many billionaires we have, I'm very proud of it. The billionaire wealth in India, which, by the way, Indians, has crossed $1 trillion on December 10th. Yeah, $1,041 billion. The Forbes keeps a daily update. Forbes is my favorite website. I keep looking at the billionaire list. It's an aspirational thing. You keep maybe one day your name. But this $1 trillion, 90% of this wealth is concentrated in upper caste hands. 90% of the wealth. That is the World Inequality Lab's finding. So I'm just going to show you a few things on numbers on what kind of stuff happens with the kind of concentration. Oh, another thing that I didn't manage to put on a slide. I'm sure you've all heard of the bank, the multinational bank, Swiss bank, Credit Suisse. I'm sure I'm murdering the pronunciation, but Credit Suisse or Credit Suisse does every year a world, from the point of view of wealth, they do a global wealth handbook, a global wealth report, and a global wealth data handbook. I have followed that since it began 20 odd years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And the present thing, the interesting thing about this Credit Suisse inequality, they're not even looking at it from the point of view of the inequality, they're looking at it as a wealth report. But the interesting thing about the Credit Suisse Global Handbook is that it divides the total household wealth of every society it covers, about 132 countries, into the deciles. It gives the wealth decile wise, meaning 10 layers. Decile, of course, is 10. So the top decile to the bottom decile. The top 1% of your society control a greater share of wealth in India than the top 1% of United States society controls in America. The bottom the bottom 50% of your country, the bottom 50% own 6% of total household wealth. The bottom 30%, their wealth has retreated into the negative, obviously very high debt levels. So this is Credit Suisse. But I will get back to say what happened, how our the billionaire wealth rose, and where does that money come from? What are the sectors that it comes from? In 1991, we had 0 billionaires. Yeah. We then embarked on a new policy, new path, etc., to not be ashamed of making wealth, etc. That's fine. In 1996, between 1991 and 96, we managed to mint 1 billionaire. But 1991, 0, 1 in 96. By 2000, we had 8. By 2011-12, the year Chandramouli presided over the socio-economic caste census, looking at the other end of the spectrum, we had 53. 2012, we had 53. After all, even that 2011-12 report, you gave the data in 2000, it published in 2015, right? So in 2020, just before the lockdown, by the way, Forbes interestingly publishes its billionaires list every year on March 7th, March 8th, International Women's Day. Maybe that's also an aspirational thing because there are very few women in the list. The Forbes gives us this list on March 8th every year. On March 8, 2020, that is 16 days before lockdown, 17 days before lockdown, we had 98 billionaires. Now, if you take the average, 91 to 2020, 20 years, we were minting billionaires on an average 4.5 to 5 each year. 4.5 to 5 each year. Or one every 90 days or 70 days, something. One every 70 days or 80 days. Then comes COVID. The finest example of disaster capitalism. A country that was making 4 to 5 billionaires a year for 20 years makes 48 in the next 12 months. 42 in the next 12 months. We mint a new billionaire every 7 days. From 90 days to 9 days. Okay? In 12 months, first 12 months of COVID, 42. And of course, the maximum number of those newcomers are, who are they? Health sector. 24. From what they politely call the healthcare sector. I have never seen an element of care in that sector. I call it the health cash sector. And so then the next 12 months of COVID, another 26. So at the end of at the end of 24 months of the lockdowns, we have some 42, 68 new billionaires. And their wealth has grown at the rate of 270% in the preceding 8 years. Then, incidentally, one very interesting thing about our billionaires, the top ones amongst them, and most of the wealth is concentrated in the top 10, but the top amongst them, the very top, you can trace the rise of the billionaire's fortunes coterminous with the rise of his political mentor's fortunes. It's very clearly aligned. Who gets to rise in which period? So let me show you some of these numbers. And the cumulative wealth of, we now have 217 billionaires as of December 10th. As of December 10th, we have 217 billionaires. Okay, that's much more than all the Scandinavian nations put together. More than double what Japan has, far more than Australia, Canada. We used to be, for up to the COVID period, we used to be number 4 or 5. We had, Russia was ahead of us, and the Chinese are still ahead of us, but I never take them seriously. I mean, look at the Russians. Every 5 years, the Russians send half their billionaires to prison. We send ours to parliament. Mature democracy, right? So we send ours to parliament. Now and China, there is our obvious moral superiority when it comes to China. So why waste time on that? The cumulative wealth of these 217 billionaires is $1,041 billion USD. This is on the daily updates of Forbes. That is, we are talking $1 trillion. We are talking above $1 trillion in the hands of 217 people. What percentage of your population is 217 people? I'll save you the trouble. It's 0.0000014%. And their wealth is coming to about 26-27% of your GDP, reminding you of that whole other meaning of the word gross. Right? That level of concentration means that the wealth is not even in the top 1%. It's in the top 0.00014%. That is a fantastic, fantastic figure. Now, that total wealth is 1.8 times your total budget estimated expenditure for 24-25. The total wealth of 211 individuals, your total budget expenditure 24-25 and estimate is $562 billion. That means their wealth is much, much higher than the total. I've given, for those who are very particular and finicky, I've given the PPT figures. I don't set any store by PPT in these matters. Suppose you are a parent trying to send your daughter or son to Columbia University, and Columbia University charges you $50,000 a semester or a year. You don't write to Columbia University saying, according to PPP rates, I should only give you $37,000. So let's face it, you still have to pay $50,000. So I don't take, but I've given, for those economic purists, I've given the PPT figure. It's not been updated to December 10th, no? Then the cumulative wealth, it's about 1.8 times the budget's expenditure. More importantly, at a time of agrarian crisis, their wealth is 58 times India's agricultural budget. 58 times, which is $17.91 billion. By the way, the individual wealth of Mr. Ambani exceeds the GSDP of Punjab, Mr. Adani, that of Haryana. Both of them together, Punjab, Haryana, and whichever nearest state you want, their wealth exceeds the GSDP of these states. I mean, if you take Himachal from proceeding from Haryana, it exceeds the GSDP of these three states, though it's come down slightly because Mr. Adani is having a few problems. Uh, now, Mr. Ambani's net worth, he's the top, is $119.5 billion, which is 6.6 times the total expenditure on agriculture. Just Mr. Ambani's wealth is 6.6 times our total expenditure on agriculture. Yeah. And remember that if the farm laws had not been repealed, the biggest beneficiaries of the farm laws would have been Mr. Ambani and Mr. Adani. Now that $119.5 billion converts to 10.14 trillion Indian rupees. 10.14 trillion Indian rupees. Now, I decided to look, examine the promise of capitalism, that if I work as hard as Ambani, I will be, I can also be an Ambani. In fact, by the way, when I digress to tell you, when he held a $600 million wedding, there was not a single newspaper editorial condemning it outright and calling it out for what it was. Not one. Not one. Yeah? Because half the media aristocracy were attending the wedding. One of the media aristocrats from Chennai, when I wrote about it on Twitter, the media aristocrat from Chennai attacked me bitterly, saying, carried a part of my thing and said, this person is a total killjoy, not allowing people to spend their own hard-earned money and have a good time. The hard-earned money included a lot of Indian public money when Jamnagar airport was turned into an international airport overnight and air traffic control was handled by the Indian Air Force. Yeah. So I don't know that it was only his money, but even if it was, that was happening in a state called Maharashtra, where every year lakhs of weddings collapse because of the inability of the parents to afford the wedding. In the single year 2006, the Maharashtra government did a survey, on our insistence when I was in the Hindu, and found in 6 districts, Maharashtra has 36 districts, in 6 districts of Vidarbha, 3 lakh families declared that they had called off their weddings. They were unable to get their girls married. 3 lakh families unable to get their girls married doesn't mean 3 lakh girls. It could mean 5 lakh girls, depending on how many girls were there in each of these families. So this was the situation. And here you were having this wedding. In fact, a lot of the media and a lot of paid media celebrities celebrated the wedding. They celebrate. There was one lady who wrote that she had rejected an offer of 3.6 lakhs, a media Twitter influencer. She never says whether it was because it was too little or whether she had a moral objection to it, but she just says she rebelled. The media aristocrat who attacked me on this never mentioned that the said that it's perfectly legitimate to have such a wedding, which makes me wonder why the said aristocrat did not mention that the aristocrat had been invited to the wedding and attended it. Attended it. If you say it's a wonderful thing, it's great, why don't you say I was there? But you attack others who say that you shouldn't be doing this kind of a thing. So anyway, I decided to explore the promise of capitalism and say, if I work as hard, suppose anyone who works as hard as Ambani can accumulate the wealth of Ambani. Now, let's take the common man economists and others use, which is more often a common woman. Most of the agricultural laborers, the people working on, I think that we can take as a common person those who make their money on the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. They would be a good yardstick, a measure of common Indian. So I started checking. Is it possible for someone on the NREGS to accumulate the same wealth as Mukesh Ambani with hard work, because hard work makes you a billionaire. There is a problem with that theorizing of hard work makes you a billionaire, because if hard work makes you a billionaire, every woman in rural India would be a billionaire. Right? And in rural Africa, Latin America, and Asia. But since they're not, it throws a little spanner in the theorizing. Um, but anyway, can someone working on the NREGS accumulate as much wealth as Mukesh Ambani? You'll be pleased to know the answer is yes. It just takes a little time, 350.4 million years. Because the MNREGA average is 289 a day, and that for up to 100 days in a year max. That would take a household 350.8 million years to earn the $119 billion that is Ambani's worth. Of course, if the household moderated its ambitions and aspiration to just equaling Ambani's annual income, he froze his income in 2015 and said, no, I'm not taking any more money. I mean, stocks, shares, options, all that is different. But salary, check, he stopped. He froze it at 15 crores. So if the rural family is more modest in its demands and wants to accumulate that 15 crores, it takes a mere 5,109 years. 190, I'm sorry. I misspoke. So this is the kind of divides that you are seeing in your society. Extremes of wealth not seen since the heyday of the British Empire. The wealth of our $217 billionaires is 102 times our total expenditure on the Mahatma Gandhi, on the NREGS, on the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. 102 times. The enhanced MNREGS budget is around 86,000 crore or $10.13 billion. Just look, just the COVID period, you'd be, who are the largest group of dollar billionaires at the end of the COVID period? Not IT. They're number 3. Not manufacturing, health sector. Health sector, there were 32 billionaires. Manufacturing, there were 31. Tech, 16 billionaires. 16. The number of people making billions out of health was twice the number of those making money out of tech. The tech billionaires, their total worth was $59.5 billion when I last checked. Manufacturing were worth $79.2 billion. Health billionaires were worth $112.9 billion. This is at the end of COVID. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, when Mr. Chandramouli was Registrar General of Census, they did a socio-economic caste census. That year we had, the 2015, the year you came out with that, the data we had something like $74 billionaires. In the survey done across rural India, the highest earning member in 3/4 of all rural households made less than 5,000 per month. The highest earning member in the rural households, and more than 3/4 of the rural households was taking home less than 5,000 rupees a month in that survey, the socio-economic caste survey, data of 2015. You raise that bar to 10,000 a month, and that's 90% of all rural households. 90% of all rural households where the main earner was making less than 5,000, making less than 10,000 a month. There were totally only 8.29% of households, or 1.48 crore, where the monthly income of the highest earning member was 10,000 or more. So just consider, by the way, the other reason I also chose this topic, apart from the fact that I get the slightest chance, this is the topic I go for, is I told you about the problems coming up in reading, but also look at what, as literators, as writers, as journalists, as archivists, as whatever, what should we be writing about? What should we be covering? what should we be covering as the great processes of our time, the greatest of which today in India is this kind of inequality. Thank you.
So would you like to take a few questions?
Good morning, sir. I'm Jayavashni. I study in 11th grade from Shisha School. So, poverty has always been a big problem in India, and it's such a huge drawback for our Indian economy. Do you think poverty is just a really very well crafted scheme by the government to keep the people under their own control?
You know, one is that your name,
Jayavashni.
Revashni. One poverty. Please sit. Poverty has not always been a problem. By the way, prior to colonial rule, or the time when the British landed here, India accounted for, on various estimates, between 18 to 24% of global GDP. This country accounted for between 18 to 24% of global GDP. India and China together accounted for 45% of global GDP. Those are the calculations demographers and others, demographer economists are making retrospectively, but this is, no one is saying that you were doing terribly badly. In fact, if you look at the accounts of the early travelers, Tavernier, all their description, the guy, and then of Clive's description of Murshidabad, which is one of the poorest areas now, richer than any city he had seen in England. That is Robert Clive on Murshidabad. Yeah, it took 200 years of plunder and 75 years of blunders to bring you to that level of poverty. So it's not a disease. It's not something that people are born with. People are born into poverty, condemned to it because of the policies we choose to follow, the economics we choose to follow. Yeah. And I have now been a journalist 44 years. And the most marvelous thing which I find is economists and their numbers. The numbers keep getting better no matter how much the situation deteriorates. Yeah. So I think that and about your latter part of your question, many of the policies that did what they did were consciously crafted. Yeah. Remember that the 1990s were also a period when we were praising the Gordon Gekko attitude. Greed is good. Inequality is good. It raises competitiveness. This kind of stuff. Absolute. You know that, by the way, every one of those policies since 91, you have been basically in total violation of your constitution's directive principles of state policy. The first paragraph of which asks you to fight and mitigate inequality.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good morning. So I had been reading through your stuff for the past decade or so. If there is one thing which you would propose, assuming you have all the power,
I
assuming
I
you
wish.
have all the power, so what would be your initiative to reduce this inequality over a period of time?
You know, there are not one but 1,000 things you could do. But the first thing, by the way, I failed to mention that this spurt of wealth grows even more after 2016. Why? Because India abolished wealth tax in 2016. We abolished wealth tax in 2016. Yeah. If you had, by the way, a one time 10, or say even if you took 2% tax of these people, or 2% tax of the on $1 trillion, you could run your NREGS for 40 years without any problem. You could build a national health system. You could do a lot of things like that. Yeah, that's one set of things. Second is, I would recommend, as I always do, that what many others have recommended before me, three Supreme Court judgments in 40 years. The last from Justice Ashok Ganguly held that the directive principles of state policy are every inch as important as the fundamental rights. Now you start enforcing the directive principles of state policy, the right to work, the right to food, right to health and nutrition. Yeah, all these rights. By the way, there's another thing. India never stops. I'm sure the foreign service officers here will know that India never stops bragging about we were part of the declaration in drafting the declaration, UN Declaration of Human Rights. We were a part. There is no doubt about it. Do you know that there are 8 clauses in that declaration, from 20 to 28, those clauses, which we have never honored, ever, and neither has the West. In the West, UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19. But 21 to 28 is the right of labor to organize, the right to have a decent wage, the right to strike, the right to unionize, the right to their culture. Or we are probably in the first earliest 5 signatories to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Yeah? Why can't we enforce that? Why can't we enforce our own constitution's directive principles when 3 Supreme Court judgments have told you they're as important as these fundamental principles, which are enforceable? Yeah? So there's plenty you can do. You can absolutely reduce those one of the things about the Scandinavian Nordic countries, we have 3 times or 2.5 times the number of billionaires they do. Yeah? But the gap between the bottom 10 and the top 10% is much narrower than it is in India. Think about it.
Thank you, sir, for that insightful and thought-provoking session.